I want to buy a Father's Day card, not for my mother or fill-in dads or mentors who were like fathers. I want to find words for our complicated love story. People say that I look like him. Courts be looking for him, for me. It's a bad look from a child's view to see dysfunction. 2 parents, 1 judge. I love my father, but hate his bad choices and in between jobs and the system that makes him, hates him. There's very little grace for manhood mistakes. I'm torn between his imperfections and his payments. So much time wasted with little explanation for love or laws. Truth is, my father is not a breadwinner, nor a bum. He's a black man with little money and fewer choices and a lifetime of oppression. And ain't no Father's Day card to explain that, or the feeling of being in the middle of my flesh. I cannot forget the fractions of me that both deserve happiness, fairness, and second chances. I am a fraction too. I can't cancel my father out my DNA or unknow what I know about the good and bad of why my parents didn't last or love longer. I want to buy a Father's Day card without having to explain to my mama that I love her too. It's complicated. See, none of us are whole or happy. Most days, we're a kicking the can down the road type of family. You know, cussing, fussing, neck roll, you ain't. I'm calling the police. Ain't no peace, but my father's name is on this piece of paper. So it all counts, adds up, divides up differently, depends on whose hand is out or wagging or pointing or cussing or praying or wiping tears. Fathers cry too. I've seen the deduction from our lives. Truth number 2. We all trying to eat and make it before Uncle Sam takes it. The govern you men, the daddy of us all. And truth is, the courts ain't never been home to black people, so how could we trust a system that mandates manhood after 400 years? I told you it was complicated when you got to balance the scales of responsibility, reason, and race. It's easy to say, man up, if you've never been down. Cash don't make character, but it rules everything around me. 2 people made a baby. 1 gets a few hours of visitation, a bad reputation, parenting, victimization. What good are rights if the system is wrong? Need new definitions of home. I want to buy a Father's Day card and sign my name to his existence without legal assistance. I want to loop our names together in a wish, start a better relationship. I want a card for ordinary days when I couldn't say hey or ask why. I want to create new memories to close the distance between me and the man that co-created my life. I want the card to say, you are still my father, even if we don't sleep under the same roof at night.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Flint Mitchell, and I'm a program officer at the Greater New Orleans Foundation. On behalf of the Foundation and the Dillard University Center for Law and Public Interest, I'd like to welcome you to New Orleans 360 when child support becomes a debtor's prison. First and foremost, we'd like to thank Dillard University, especially President Walter Kimbrough and Professors Dr. Clark and Dr. Steve Buddington for their generosity and welcoming spirit. Before we dive into our topic, I'd like to tell you a little bit about New Orleans 360. New Orleans 360 is not simply one event. It is a series. As such, we like to hold 2 to 3 of these forums per year to highlight the racial inequities and social injustices of our region and to create the conditions for change. Through this series, we want to inspire ideas, innovation, and movement building. We want New Orleans 360 to ultimately change hearts and minds. Individual forums, such as this one, are designed to be a place where people can get a new perspective on New Orleans' biggest challenges and to find ways to contribute to their solutions. Today's forum will focus on the issue of state-ordered child support through the lenses of arts, culture, and politics to help us understand the effects it has on children and families, and most importantly, how it can act as a barrier to employment for low-income fathers who are often African-American men. As your programs indicate, tonight you will hear from the Honorable Adrian Hooper Wooten, Mississippi State Representative and Family and Civil Law Attorney. She will set the stage at the national and state levels regarding the issue of child support. Then Carmen James, Vice President of Programs at the Greater New Orleans Foundation, will give the Foundation's perspective on this issue. That is, why the Greater New Orleans Foundation is interested in this topic. Then Carmen will lead a facilitated conversation to examine child support at the national, state, and local levels. She will discuss this issue with Representative Wooten and our 2 other guests, the Honorable Wesley Bishop, Louisiana State Representative, District 99, and State Senator-elect, District 4, and Mr. Patrick Carter, facilitator for NOLA Dads, a program of family service at Greater New Orleans. Then we will give you, the audience, time to ask our panelists questions, which will be followed by another spoken word piece by Ms. Kelly Harris to close the presentation portion of New Orleans 360 when child support becomes a debtor's prison. After the forum, we invite you to mingle in the lobby and grab a bite to eat while continuing the discussion on this important topic. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mississippi State Representative, the Honorable Adrian Hooper Wooten.
Well, good evening. I'm so privileged to be able to come before you all this evening just to take a few moments of your time and speak with you about an issue that has become very prevalent and rampant throughout our community. I want to first thank the Greater New Orleans Foundation, certainly want to thank Dr. Mitchell for being the catalyst to get me here to speak with you all about this issue. The issue is the legal and administrative landscape that non-custodial fathers have to navigate. It's been my experience that there are 2 dominating perceptions embraced by society when depicting the role fathers play in the lives of their children. Watch and listen carefully.
I read your obituary for breakfast this morning. As I sat staring at the biography of your years, I couldn't help but to see what was missing. The day you were born and the night your brown body became a corpse were the only times I've seen you be selfless. In between, you lived a musical life, one that sounded of an alphabetical orchestra. Your favorite song was the letter U. I was your daughter. They didn't tell the truth in your obituary, Daddy. They left out some things that I want to share. If they haven't already seen the forgotten pieces shivering in my eyes, your eyes are mine. I see you when the mirror decides to hang us some portion on my bathroom walls. Why didn't they tell of how much you love playing games, Pop? I promise you were the best player in hide and go seek that I've ever seen. Tell them telling your little ones that you will come see them tomorrow, playing double dutch with our emotions There was a dice game in your eyes, and you died in mine every time my tomorrow became a lucky 7 games of peekaboo that only you won at. I quit a long time ago. Why didn't they mention the day that we stood face to face, child to parent? Father speaks, I love you, but if you and your siblings never wanted to speak to me again, I wouldn't care. Daughter hears the crackling of fire laughing in her heart, burning away any force of trust I could ever have for a man. I saw honesty in your eyes at that moment, and it scared the vulnerability out of me. Why didn't they mention how much you love swimming, Father? I would have asked if you could hear the ocean behind my sarcasm. Smell the sandstorm in my skin. I have spent years swallowing every hourglass I could find, attempting to steal back the time that we had. Those drowning yourself in shark-infested seas a week before your obituary was written. I received a text from a friend that read, "Sorry about your dad." What a comical way to find out that your father is gone. The night that motorcycle flung your soul into eternity. I knew your death would be too hard to get used to, seeing that you were a deadbeat my entire life. So let's start over again. I will rewrite your obituary for you. Make a metaphor of your life. The daughter that you gave your genes away to but can never seem to fit inside of your pockets grew up to be important. She shreds mics open and makes dead things come to life for you. Only if you can live twice, you would have been the double entendre I can never write. So let's just write about how good you were to me. How you told me I was beautiful, so I didn't have to murder my integrity and resurrect my dying self-esteem. Held your daughter to your chest till she heard your heart split itself into a lifetime of I love yous that choked out her addiction to affirmation from other fatherless fiends daddy. I would tell them how you made me feel worth it, so I never had to buy back my soul from bankrupt sheets belonging to little boys that were too poor to purchase my body with a bended knee, Dad. I would chisel into the dashes of your deathbed how you kept every promise that crawled out of your hands and into my memory, so it's easy for me to believe that my Father in heaven isn't a liar like my daddy on earth. We cannot forget to tell them how you lived to walk your daughter down the aisle, look her husband in the face and say, "It is I, her protector, her provider, her father, who gives her to you to do the same." See? Daddy, you have a brand new obituary now. The old one wasn't honest enough. And now, neither is your daughter.
Arsenio, I'm tired of us always having to prove our love to our sons. One of the biggest compliments I get a lot of times is how great of a father I am. See pictures on the internet. People compliment you a lot because they see photos. And honestly, sometimes I want to tell people, don't tell me I'm a good father when you don't know anything about me. Fun-loving daddy and son pictures on a Facebook page do not equate to instilling values into your child's development. And the fact that I'm black should be irrelevant when it comes to my ability to raise my son. My skin tone should not make me any better or worse when it comes to the paternal instinct. But because fathers like me are apparently extinct, I get extra credit. And for what? For doing what I'm supposed to do. From strangers. Strangers who don't know, when my son was born, I only got him from 12 noon on Saturdays to 5 p.m. on Sundays, went to the court to get more time, came back with 12 noon on Saturdays to 5 p.m. on Sundays, plus child support, fought for a year, had him for a year and a half, if not more, had him 50% of the time, if not more, only to lose him when he started school, the summertime and rotating holidays. So when you see me in the streets with my little one and want to say, it's so good seeing a father doing his job, spending that quality time, don't, because I ain't being proud. Rob is the greatest gift. Forced to live through pictures on an iPhone to recognize the touch of my lips more than they do my fingertips. And the smell of his lotion every day I rub into my skin, so when I smell myself, I think of him. Forced to live through memories that occur within the span of 1 week. Through occasional webcam chats with a child too young to speak back, so when he reaches for you through that camera, all you can say is, "Son, I miss you too." Or watching your son learn how to ride a bike via Skype at the hands of another man, and even though he is a good man and you are glad he's around, that man is not true. And not letting his mother know that all this is getting to you, so you get up to grab some tissue because at all times, that distance of 3,117.4 miles gets to billboards like free milk. Try dropping your son off at the airport with free teeth in his mouth, go 4 weeks without him, watch him come back with eyes, and see if you don't beat yourself up for not being around during that time. So don't tell me I'm a good father when you don't know anything about me. Try to convince a culture that knows nothing about you that you are simply worthy of time. See, thousands of people inspired by your story but still feel that you are getting nowhere. Half people motivated by the pain that sits right here every day inside of your chest, and that same pain being a reflection of the amount of love that you possess. I want you to imagine your newborn baby sleep. You're watching, trying to get his sleep patterns down, praying to God to get it right because you have one night now to go 6 days until you get him back. Imagine being able to fly through this world, doing what you love to do, but because of a court order, your son before the age of 1 has to fly twice a month, which maybe by the age of 2, he'll have more frequent fly miles than you. So I'll never spend a day in your life locked up in prison and still watch your child grow up primarily through photos. Learn about his milestones via text message or Facebook and see if you don't feel dumb. So how can I smile when people tell me I'm such a good father when I feel like I'm not giving enough time to actually be one? Raise your son without feeling like you're actually raising him. And although everything in this world doesn't go the way we plan, I can accept that all that's fine. I just don't understand how a man can be forced to pay half of daycare, half of medical expenses, food, clothes, water, but the same man that laid down to create that child is not automatically given half of the time. Something about that situation is not right. And when I'm done with this poem, I mean this. I don't care if any you cut. I just want my praise, my kudos, my air, my earth, my water, my drive, my moon, my sun, my baby, my motivation, my fun. I just want my cake. I just want my son justice for his pal. I want my baby back. Thank you.
So by show of hands, who here in the audience thinks that the first spoken word poem represents the dominating perception in society? Who in the audience thinks that the latter or the second spoken word poem represents the dominating perception in society? Now that's pretty scary. In my practice of law, I represent the mother who is struggling to make ends meet, who desperately needs some help with caring for her children, but the father who has the ability to do so refuses. I represent the father who wants to be more than a payor in a relationship with the mother who becomes a payee, who's only concerned about receiving a child support check more than she is about the development of a nurturing relationship between the father and the child. I represent the father that can't overcome a law that allows him to see his child every other weekend, every other holiday in an even or odd year, and possibly 2 weeks of summer vacation, maybe twice during the summer. And that's if the father lives in close proximity to the child. Otherwise, if the child is in a different state from that of the non-custodial parent, i.e. father, that's no longer a feasible arrangement, and then it becomes a matter of a parent either driving to see that child or either meeting at a halfway point. Oftentimes, that non-custodial father drives to that halfway point, and guess what? There's nobody there to meet him. And oftentimes, he may not have transportation. He's traveling in transportation that he's borrowed. He's borrowed the gas money to get there. But what can he do about that? Because it costs more to retain an attorney than it does to borrow that car and that gas money to get to that destination for something that was unfulfilled. And for many non-custodial parents, they don't have the money to seek out representation because they have bills to pay, mouths to feed. So wherein lies the problem? What is the problem? Is it a broken system that seems to be designed to punish in comparison to assisting? Could it be that a system which doesn't take into consideration a person's life circumstances is a part of a systemic problem designed to make and keep a person as a statistic? Could the problem be that the law doesn't make exceptions for non-custodial fathers who in this economy search for gainful employment where there is none and through no fault of their own cannot find any? The answer to all these questions is absolutely yes. The law in many states does not give leniency to the non-custodial parent for life circumstances, whether it be disability, whether it be the economy, whether it's work-related injuries, lack of education, lack of work skills. In the state of Mississippi, any and all sources of income, any and all sources of money will be considered as income. That includes disability and unemployment payments. If a non-custodial parent is unemployed, the court can base their child support on prior years of wage earnings. And child support is due when it is due. That means once that court order is slapped into place, boom. Whether you have the ability to pay or not, you are now obligated to pay it. And so then what happens next? That you've placed a person on child support who may not have the resources to pay it. The next step in that is a motion for contempt. So now you have a person that's being served with a motion for contempt and being summoned to court. And at that court proceeding, the court's responsibility isn't to care about why he's not paying the money. They could care less about that. And you have some judges that will say, hey, figure it out. What the court's responsibility is to get the money that is owed. And oftentimes, if a father comes into court and doesn't have the ability to pay, there used to be a time, now we have a 2011 Supreme Court case that is taking care of this issue, but there used to be a time where they will come into court, and if they did not have the money, they would go to jail. You would sit in jail until one of two things happen. You come up with that money, or you will sit there and you will be assessed a set rate on a daily basis until it's paid out. And once you emerge, you now have some new titles. One being a convicted felon, one probably being an unemployed individual. And the court says what? We don't care about that. Now, in instances where you have a custodial or non-custodial parent that has the ability to pay, if they're brought into court for a motion for contempt, I, as an attorney, if I'm representing the mother, then I can ask for attorney's fees. Now, you might come to court and you might be able to pay that money that you are in arrearage for. But I'm going to ask for my attorney's fees. And you'll be given a certain amount of time to pay. And if you don't pay it, then what happens? Well, guess what? We got another motion for contempt. It's a vicious cycle. Once you become a part of it, it's very difficult to break that cycle. The harsh reality is that the law provides more ways for a non-custodial father to be incarcerated for non-payment of support than to be assisted with payment of support. Tax returns can be levied, wages can be garnished, licenses can be suspended, both driver's and professional licenses. All obstacles placed in the way to prevent a person from resolving their child support issues. And then oftentimes there may be other issues. You may have someone who may be dealing with alcohol or drug addiction. And oftentimes it comes from being bogged down with these type of responsibilities. Or you may have someone that has mental health issues, or they may have physical limitations. But the court doesn't consider life circumstances. According to a study by the Urban Institute, nearly 30% of 2.5 million non-custodial fathers are in prison, and half that are not in prison are unemployed. And for those that are employed, they make about $5,600 a year, well below the poverty line. But in some instances, when the non-custodial father has the ability to pay the support in arrearage but refuses to do so, he can pay that money and possibly walk out of court. But what happens to the individual that doesn't have that resource? For a non-custodial father who simply doesn't have it to pay, a jail sentence simply becomes a like or similar scenario comparable to the school to prison pipeline or the cradle to prison pipeline. Now you have a parent, typically a male, who is locked up, further defeating his ability to search for gainful employment, or if he was gainfully employed, he's now lost his job because he's incarcerated. Such a vicious cycle. And that struggle may be a byproduct of a child whose opportunity to finish their education was taken away when he was expelled from school for becoming a disruption to the classroom due to his lack of ability to understand the classroom material, because in the environment that he's being raised, he doesn't hear the King James English spoken all the time. And so now you have a situation where it may be difficult for the teachers to communicate with him or her in an effective manner. Possibly the teacher fails to realize that this is a problem, or they simply don't care. Or could it be that no one realized that this child has a reading disability brought on by dyslexia or a hearing problem or a speech impediment? And now this person never graduated, never received a GED, because he was passed on until he was passed out of a school system designed intentionally or possibly unintentionally to fail someone with these life circumstances. Could it be that a child comes to school, hasn't been able to get a good night's sleep because of the environment that he's being raised in, and this is the only time he can get sleep is when he comes to school, or doesn't have food at home and only gets a meal when he comes to school? These are the type of things that the system doesn't take into consideration. And what I'm saying to you is this is the foundation for a lot of men that are caught up in this vicious cycle. Walter Scott, a black man that was pulled over for a broken taillight, fled on foot, and after an alleged scuffle with the police officer was fatally shot in the back. In his own words, he said, "The first time I went to jail for failure to pay child support, my life was sent into a tailspin." His brother, Rodney Scott, said that the threat of another stay behind bars and the potential loss of yet another job caused him to run. His brother said that every job Walter had, he got fired from it because he went to jail because he was locked up for child support. He said his brother got to a point where he just felt like it was a defeated purpose. The non-custodial parent often ends up behind bars, setting up a modern-day debtor's prison that makes it harder for them to find employment when released. They become a convicted felon, oftentimes for being poor. This was the life of Walter Scott, and this is the life of many of our black men today. So who becomes a pawn in this vicious cycle? Some would say the deadbeat dad. Others would say the dead broke dad. It's the dead broke dad that's truly destitute and goes to jail over and over for failure to pay support simply because he's poor. The problem begins with court orders that set the child support too high, never giving them the ability to make good on their obligation. The support generally is based on what others would call imputed income. That's what a person would be making if they were earning what a full-time wage-paying job would be paid. It's not based on what they can actually pay. A 2007 Urban Institute study of child support debt in 9 large cities or states found that 70% of the arrears were owed by people who reported less than $10,000 a year in income. As of 2012, more than 35 billion was owed in child support payments in the United States, according to the National Center for State Courts. And to further alienate the haves from the have-nots, these poor fathers are expected to pay on average 83% of their income for child support, a percentage that decreases as the income bracket increases. Research shows that poor fathers are often asked to pay significantly more of their income than middle-class fathers. Research from the Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation indicates that nearly 2/3 of poor fathers had support orders that demanded more than half of their income. And even more astonishing is that the custodial parent, which is typically the mother, doesn't have to work. So if a mother receives public assistance, the father must pay it back, even if he's poor. So she gets the assistance, he gets charged with the bill. And so you ask, what do you do? Is it enough that we make revisions to the law? Would initiatives like the New York Strengthening Families Through Stronger Fathers initiative help? This program was designed to help low-income fathers find work and pay child support. The initiative offered non-custodial fathers an earned income tax credit. Although this sunset this year, it was offered in addition to employment-oriented programs aimed at helping parents behind in support to find steady work and employment for their children. But of course, that's been discontinued also, even though the research shows that these programs worked. They've been discontinued. More than half of the states now have programs that do help non-custodial parents overcome their barriers as to why they're not paying their support. In Virginia, judges refer parents facing jail time to the intensive case monitoring program. There are alternatives out there. This program provides the father with a caseworker who works with community partners to solve the problem as to why he's not paying support. If he needs a job, they find him a job. This is wonderful. And since 2008, that program has collected more than $4 million in child support. 86% of the participants were men. Georgia is phenomenal, if you ask me, in the innovation that they've taken with providing programs to assist non-custodial fathers. They have an initiative called Georgia's Fatherhood Program. It's been in existence since January 1997, and it's administered by the Georgia Division of Child Support Services, and it helps the non-custodial father avoid having to appear before a judge. It offers assistance with these things: driver's license reinstatement, GED enrollment, job training, job search placement, volunteer work opportunities, and my favorite, support order modification. Georgia also has a reentry program. Georgia Division of Child Support Services has partnered with the Department of Corrections and Pardons and Parole to offer reentry services, which provides incarcerated non-custodial fathers with paternity testing, if it has not already been established, and assists with helping and reestablishing the relationship of that non-custodial parent with their children. Georgia also has another reentry program called PAVE, Parental Access, Visitation, and Education, which focuses on efforts to reconnect that father with their children and provides visitation. These are wonderful initiatives, if only every state had them. There are also some other recommendations that could be taken into consideration. How about identifying offenders that are being sent to jail for non-payment of child support? If you provide those names to the Department of Human Services, they can then communicate with that person while they're in prison, give them pertinent information about their case, such as your amount of arrearage, how much your support is, what we can do to try to alleviate this problem once you are released. How about a 90-day grace period? Give them 90 days to get on their feet once they are let out of jail. Give them an opportunity to find transportation, housing, to get those essential needs that they need. How about giving them 90 days to try to find a job? And if they are not able to find these things, Georgia says, why not refer them to the Georgia Fatherhood Program of Child Support Problem Solving Court for assistance? If only other states would follow their lead. How about limiting the wages that can be withheld? Instead of 65%, where the federal government has capped it at, 50%, I say lower. You have to take into consideration that a number of these fathers have to live. And more importantly, they may have other children at home that they may not have been given credit for when the child support was established. What about the fines and the fees and the arrearage that accumulates while they're in prison? Now, about 21 states allow for this arrearage to not be collected or accrue while they're incarcerated, but the other states don't. So that means that you go to jail for an arrearage that you came into court for, and when you leave jail, you still got arrearage that you're responsible for. Give them a break on that. If they have served their time, why should they come out and have to then be faced with the same problem? Reinstate their driver's license, reinstate their professional licenses, because they've served the time for failure to pay. And by golly, have a single agency tracking the debt. Nobody should have to call 4 different places about one case. Now, President Obama's administration has proposed updates to the child support rules, such as the Child Support and Fatherhood Initiative, an effort by President Obama to modernize the child support enforcement program and to encourage non-custodial parents to support their children and to play an active role in their lives. President Obama is proposing that non-custodial parents' child support be based on what they can pay, not what you think they can pay. President Obama is also proposing that courts stay child support orders and collections while a parent is incarcerated. Understand that states have discretion over how they collect child support. So the recommendations that are being made are not implemented by all states. These are recommendations that, if they could become federal regulation, maybe they would lighten the load for some of our non-custodial fathers. President Obama's administration is proposing regulations which would give state agencies new options to use federal dollars to offer employment services to non-custodial parents and to assist with job placement rather than jail placement. Now, I applaud President Obama on his initiatives to remedy some of the ills and woes that our non-custodial fathers are facing. And some states have applied a special child support schedule that applies only to low-income cases. It's called the low-income payer rule, where it's not a lot of money, maybe $25 to $50, but it also encourages a father to be responsible, to pay that amount. It encourages a development of a relationship between that father and his children. And also, it's one of the alternative approaches that can be utilized to remedy the state laws, which are the foundation of our failed system. So I've been going on and on about the recommendations and things that we can do to improve this system. I've talked with you about some of the causes that a person can go through, or life circumstances that will cause a person to fall into this trap. And I do hope that I have provided some insight into the conflicting societal views and state laws, and also encourage us to pay closer attention to the role our state laws play in the systemic debtors' prison. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Representative Wooten. Could we please give her another round of applause? Many of you may be asking, why is the Greater New Orleans Foundation interested in this issue? We have a program focused on building economic security for our families here in the New Orleans region. It has 2 components: a workforce development program called New Orleans Works, or NOW, and an economic opportunity learning community comprised of 9 organizations in New Orleans who help low-income families build their assets. Through both of these programs over the last year, we have been exploring what are some of the barriers that families are faced with in being able to build assets. With our New Orleans Works program, we've been very successful with helping low-income women, most of them African American and Latino, connect to employment. We've had a 90%, more than 90% employment rate. We're very proud of it. However, we realize that we have not been successful with connecting Black men. And in our city, more than 52% of Black men are not employed. So over the last year, we've been kind of going down the rabbit hole a bit and starting to ask questions and listening to our grantees, talking with employers, talking with our board, and this issue of child support has come up time and time again as a barrier for families that our families here are grappling with. We even have cases where the custodial parent is helping the non-custodial parent pay the child support to the court so that he can keep working. We have mothers who are helping to pay child support debt. And as we've just learned more and more about this issue, we thought it was important to bring it to you tonight to help us just start this process of unpacking it. So I'd like to just invite to the stage to join me. Few members back, I'd like to invite Representative Wooten back. Also newly elected, the Honorable Wesley Bishop, and also Patrick. Could you come to the stage? And we're just gonna have a conversation about how this issue plays out locally. We've already heard from Representative Wooten and Wesley Bishop. We're thrilled. Congratulations on your re-election. We're thrilled for you. And we are thrilled to know that you have sponsored legislation that deals with this issue. And essentially, we have a bit of an unfunded mandate. Could you just start the conversation by talking about this issue, how it impacts Louisiana families, and the impetus for the legislation that you sponsored?
I authored and passed back in 2013, but it would be disingenuous of me to say I authored and I passed it. I've had conversations over my entire lifetime about this with people that I know on a regular basis. One of the promises I made to myself when I first got elected is that every session I would always do at least one bill that would directly affect the guys who grew up just like me. Folks who didn't make it to SUNO, who didn't make it to law school, who didn't make it to Harvard, and who had some real concerns. And I really wanted to do that. My very first session in office, I did a bill because I had many of my friends who had gotten into trouble, had gone to jail, had paid their debt to society. While they were incarcerated, they picked up a skill or they picked up a trade. They became a barber or a carpenter or a barber or a beautician with the idea that when they got out of jail, they were going to take that same skill that they had learned and try to put that together so they wouldn't get back into the same trouble that they did when they got out of jail. Well, the problem was that Louisiana had a law that said that if you had a past felony conviction, that prohibited you from being able to get that license to be a barber or a beautician. It made no sense whatsoever. One Saturday morning, I was in a barber shop, and a mother was in there, and she approached me because her son was about to get out of jail, and she was concerned about the options she was going to have employment-wise. And so with that in mind, that's how we created that particular bill and this state law today. So maybe if I was arrested for bank fraud, maybe I could not be a bank teller, but it had nothing to do with my ability to cut a high-top fade on a Saturday morning and make a great living, because my barber, my electrician, and my beautician make a whole lot more money than me. So that was the idea behind that particular piece. My second year in office is a bill that you're actually speaking of. And that was the case because I have an intern in my office who grew up without his father. And we often talk about that on a regular basis. And before he was my intern, he was my work-study student in college. So I knew a lot about his family. And when it was time for him to graduate, he did not want to invite his father to the graduation. And he didn't want to invite his father to graduation because his father had not been a part of his life his entire life. And he said, now that I've reached some level of success, now he wants to show up. And there was a great deal of resentment that was actually there. I had the good fortune to grow up with my father, and I told him that if his father was there and his father was attempting to be a part of his life, no matter how late he was trying to do it, he owed it to himself to try and get to know his father and not live through the man that his mother told him his father was for the last 18 years. And so that's kind of how that whole piece came to play. So as those conversations went on, a lot of what Representative Wooten talked about actually came out. It talked about the financial challenges he faced growing up. It talked about the fact that he didn't have the kind of education that he had, so because of that, he oftentimes wasn't worthy and wasn't enough to get the kind of position that he actually had. Oftentimes, what was being distinguished and being pointed at him as being a deadbeat dad, he was actually a dead broke dad. And it was more of a financial situation more so than anything else. So what we tried to do in this legislation, it was called the Fatherhood First Initiative. And the reason why we called it Fatherhood First, we actually put a spin on what Representative Wootenhofer talked about. When judges sit and see exactly what's going on, they're not looking or taking anything else into account. They're just trying to see, well, I need this money and you have to pay this particular bill. And so what we were saying was that while you're a father and while you're going out and you're working and you're being a breadwinner and you're doing all those other things to try to provide for your family, before you do any of those things, your first job is to be a father first. So in being a father first, we need to figure out a way to try to decrease all of the impediments that are in place that's stopping you from being an integral part of your son or your daughter's lives. And there's a speed element to that because we want to get you back into that child's life sooner rather than later. Because what we found out is if that child makes 18, 20, 22, if I've made it this long without you, why do I need you now? And so that was really the idea behind this particular piece. It had been put in place many, many years ago and had become defunct. And so what we did was we started a demonstration project through the Department of Children and Family Services to look exactly what we were doing and to address some of the other issues that the initial legislation did not address. One thing that was extremely important that we found out was this whole aspect of drug abuse. This whole aspect of mental illness, this whole aspect of just having just basic career skills, parenting skills, things along those lines that we thought if we could remedy those situations, it would allow us to be able to leapfrog a lot of the impediments that were in place and try to get that father into their child's life sooner rather than later. I could go on for a long time and talk about that, but I want to kind of pass that along, and we'll try to address any questions or comments you might have.
Patrick Carter is with an organization called NOLA Dads, which is a part of our economic opportunity learning community. I'm just curious, Patrick, I'm not going to ask a question that's on the sheet right now, but I'm just curious, for the fathers who are in your program, how many of them understood, especially if they are a non-custodial parent, and if they're custodial, if the custodial parent of their child, if she is receiving public supports, how many of them understand that they then get the bill for those public supports going into becoming a father?
In my position with the NOLA Dads, I'm hands-on with all the guys in the community, so I get the real stories on a daily basis from fathers from all different walks of lives and different age groups. You know, so to answer your question, none. None really go into it knowing that.
Could you talk a little bit more, Patrick, about the dads in your program, and what are some of the real issues that they come to you with and that you are working with them on?
Well, I love my fellas in my program. I'll say that first and foremost. But the things that the barriers they're facing are basically built around employment, built around the barriers between the communication between the mother and holding the child in between as a pawn. You know, a lot of times when I sit with the guys, we try to come up with a plan on how to heal the relationship between the mother first to eliminate certain issues far as child support, because a lot of guys talk about being close to being on child support because the mother will say, if you don't do X, Y, and Z for me, I'm going to put you on child support, you know, which they don't know the ramifications and implications that child support will have on their lives. Because once you're in that system, you know, as everybody else explained, you're buried. So besides that, just understanding the role of a father and how important it is to play that part in each child's life. It's a very high importance, and a lot of guys don't realize the magnitude of, you know, actually being a father. So that's the type of discussions I have. And a lot of guys will shy away from being in the kid's life if they feel like that they're not making the right amount of money. They don't feel like they can be the man in that household, and they do have issue with other men stepping into that household and providing those services for the house and playing that role, but they don't know how to come forth as a group, collective, to basically provide the needs for the child.
Representative Bishop, could you just talk a little bit more about your bill? You mentioned that it included some provisions for anger management and financial literacy and parenting skills for fathers, but there weren't dollars attached to it. And this issue of fathers going to jail for non-payment of child support, could you speak to that a little bit? And how do you feel the provisions in your bill could help that? Or what more do we need to do to address the issue?
Part of the issue that we noticed is that when we had a chance to talk, and there was some initial focus groups that were done before the initial Fatherhood First Council was actually put together, and it talked about what is it that's stopping, I guess, fathers from being a part of their children's lives, and many of the issues that we talked about already were identified as being a part of that. One part that we did not mention was like the whole idea of anger management. I'm also an attorney by trade, and so I've actually represented folks on both sides of the coin, and it's very interesting. And we all, I guess, have poster children, I guess, for the particular piece, and I think that, as Representative Wooten mentioned, that the vast majority of the image that you see when it comes to child support is a situation whereby you have a mother who is raising a child or children, you have a father that has the ability to pay, but does not have the willingness to pay, and oftentimes that father may very well have other children by another mother. And then you have children on one side of town who are receiving support and children on the other side of town not receiving support. So that's the more popular piece. But for most of the gentlemen that come my way and that talk to me, you have a situation whereby individuals who really want to be a part of someone's life. And I can tell you when it really kind of came home to me, and this is a very true story, my best friend on the face of this earth, when we went to college together, we were out on a weekend, and he dated this young lady for about one semester. They never saw each other again, and she never came back to school after that semester. I went to undergrad, graduate school, law school. 10 years later, this gentleman knocks on my door one day. He said, "Man, do you remember so-and-so?" I don't have the faintest idea who she is. He hands me a sheet of paper that he got from the DA's office saying that he has to come down for a paternity test because a young lady came down and applied for welfare benefits, and she listed that he was the father of the child. Mind you, he hadn't seen her in 10 years. His name was on the birth certificate. He went down to get a paternity test. 99.9% you the daddy. He had a wife. He had 2 children, lived somewhere else. Try to explain that over a dinner. And he was like, well, and at that particular time, he was working. He was trying to make ends meet, but there wasn't this abundance of money that was actually around. He wasn't a deadbeat dad. He didn't know he was a dad. But the law made no distinction between what happened to him and somebody else who was a big baller, shot caller, who had a 6-figure income, but was choosing not to provide for their kids. You know, so unfortunately, we don't have this gray area of which like minds can come together and figure out what's the most reasonable thing to do that's what's in the best interest of the child. But we do have these black and white extremes that deal with you one way or the other. That was the idea behind this particular bill, to try to figure out a way to get that done. Unfortunately, for the last several years, the state of Louisiana is at a $1.6 billion deficit. So we can't find money for basic services, let alone trying to solve an issue like this that is vitally critical here in the state of Louisiana, as well as throughout the entire country.
As we look at this issue of child support, and you had said yourself, some people see fathers as deadbeat, but they might actually be dead broke. And I think public perception actually feeds this system of keeping fathers hampered down. And to support fathers, it's not supporting mothers, but it's about supporting the entire family. So in order to help break this vicious cycle that you spoke about, what kinds of support specifically? You mentioned a few things, but what would you say that we could look to do here in Louisiana, especially around the issue of incarcerating fathers?
Whenever I represent a father, and that's typically who I represent when I go to court, is a father who's received either he's being served with child support papers or it's a contempt matter. And so my responsibility, first of all, is to go into court if the contempt motion has in there that my client be jailed well, I need to convince the judge, even if my client doesn't have the ability to pay all the arrearage, there's no point in jailing him, because if he's in jail, it can't be paid. Okay, the point here is to get this arrearage taken care of. And so when you have a person that becomes a part of that cycle, I feel that those programs that I discussed are important because people need help. At some point in time in everyone's life, I don't care who you are, and I don't care what type of resources that you have available to you, you will need some assistance in some shape, form, or fashion. And so in particular instances where you have individuals who may not have that education for whatever reason, or who doesn't have those job skills, or let's just be honest about it, the economy is basically coming out of a recession, but at the end of the day, we are still in a slump. It is difficult at best for some folk to find employment. And I'll say this, if you live in an area where it is primarily a poor area, those people get caught up in that cycle. You don't have transportation, you don't have anyone that you may be able to go live with, you are stuck. And there are no opportunities there. Programs that I discussed are of a nature that would assist a person with coming out of that slump. If your license has been suspended, if your professional license has been suspended, you may not know if you're the father, but you didn't go to court when you got the papers. So because you didn't go to court, the court said you are the father. And you're going to pay this amount of child support, even though the father didn't show up to say, I am the father, I'm not the father. He didn't show up to say, I can pay this is my income. So the court will slap an amount on the father. I've represented fathers in those situations. Married fathers, that happens to them also now. Don't show up to court. You might be paying $2,500 in child support through garnishment proceedings. Now you come to me, you barely can pay me because they're withholding all your money. You have to go take out a loan to come and pay me. Now I have to go into court to try to get that wrong righted for my client. So those type of programs are good programs because they hone in on the issues that a person faces once they have become what I call a part of the system and a statistic, because now you're in the system.
When you have fathers who find themselves in this vicious cycle, what supports or what's out there for them now in New Orleans and Louisiana? What can you help, what's available for them to turn to?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I usually sit with them myself, and we map it out. We get on the computer, we look up different resources, we look up different organizations that may be able to help them. If I have to drive myself, I do go outside my job duties. I hope anybody from family service is not here. I go outside my job duties and I do assist by any means necessary to get people out of their situation. So I can't tell you any specific organizations that deal with child support that I actually, hands-on deal with.
Well, I'm going to turn to the audience now for your questions. If anyone has questions of our panelists, you're welcome to ask a question.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this evening. I'm going to pose this to Representative Wooten, but if anybody else wants to weigh in, that'd be great. You had mentioned President Obama's initiative had, and I might have misunderstood, something along the lines about perhaps a better way to calculate what an individual can pay. Is that written down anywhere? Is that a practice that's actually in play? Because, of all of the things, that seems like it might be, like it'd be wonderful if there was like a template for a judge to like fill things in, or I don't know. Is that?
What I was speaking of were proposals that President Obama has presented to Congress in his budget for this fiscal year to improve the child support rules on the federal level. And that was one of them, that child support be based on what a parent's ability to pay is and not what their prior earnings may have been. Because oftentimes you may have been employed January through July. You go into court in September, you're not employed anymore. And some judges will say, well, this is your income for 2015. This is what I'm basing this child support off of, but you no longer have that support. So President Obama basically is proposing, let's base it on their ability to pay present day ability to pay. And I got it off of, just doing research. If you're asking if it's a policy that the courts follow, you may have some judges. Now, keep in mind, I keep saying that judges have discretion. It's all about what some judges want to consider. And so you have some judges that will not consider that. And then you have some judges who do take that into consideration.
Just a question about the 52% of African American men who are working age, who are unemployed. How many of those men are in a child support situation?
It'd be difficult to answer that particular question. I would suffice it to say you probably have a sizable portion. That number is typically over the age of 18. Typically, the older you get, the more likely it is that you may in fact have a child. But I think that has a great deal to do, not so much with their being unemployed, and that number does not figure into the number of black men that are underemployed. Those individuals who may happen to have, advanced education, may have a college degree, but who are still flipping burgers. So for the wages that they receive, for the amount of skills that they have, really don't mesh that out. So they still don't bring up the income that they would need, along with those individuals who have no income whatsoever.
Have you all seen some cases where the parents have figured out a system for them, to not work through the court system, but a success story, something that will make us feel better?
I have a couple success stories, so I'll just share with you one. It's I'll say his name is James Brown, and when he first started the group, he was on the verge of child support. She had the yo-yo, and he was frustrated every time he would come. He's working at a restaurant. He's underemployed, and he had 2 kids, and the lady he was with had 2 kids already. And they were separated. So she was in a situation where she's buried too. She has 4 kids, and she's under 30 years old, and he's about 34, and he has 2 kids. He's underemployed. So they had a horrible relationship. They couldn't communicate at all. He would, give her money and things of that nature to help her out, but she was still dangling the child support situation. But at the end of the day, it came down to the communication. And communication on all levels, and just to sit down. I sat down with both of them, actually. After the group, I just told her, to come and just meet with me, and we just talked, and we just had like an open conversation on, what are some of the barriers that they have, and what are some of the communication barriers. What do you not like, or what do you do like about the situation? Is he a good father? Is he not a good father? What are some of the things he can work on? What are some of the things you can work on? And by the end of that conversation, they were laughing and joking. And they came up with a real money plan on what's realistic for them and what it's going to look like. And he, promised to stay consistent. And because it came down to the end of the day, it's not about them, it was about the kids. And the kids suffer when they don't get along, and the kids hurt when they hear the parents arguing over, monetary things. So that was one of my great success stories. And still to this day, he sends me emails and things of that nature, and he's remarried, and his kids came to the wedding. They were in the wedding, and his ex-girl came to the wedding. And it was this great situation off of just actually sitting down and crunching the numbers, actually sitting down and talking about and getting over yourself. Both parties have egos. Both parties feel some kind of way about certain situations, things that happened in the past. So getting that just out in the open, sometimes with a mediator that's not a family member or a church member that feels like they're going to take sides, and just hashing everything out. So they came to,
I mentioned that I'm an attorney by trade, but one of the things that I've seen oftentimes, what stands in the way of being able to resolve those issues in the absence of a courthouse and the absence of a judge, I think are the unresolved issues between the 2 adults in the situation. As quiet as it's kept, oftentimes mama wants to get back with daddy and daddy wants to get back at mama. And if you could get them together, most of the time it would solve the problem of the children. The problem is that you then have 2 other adults that are now in the scenario, daddy's new girlfriend and mama's new boyfriend. And so every time mama's new boyfriend is around or comes into the picture or seems to be exercising undue influence over the situation, daddy's going to get pissed off. And when you flip that scenario around, when daddy's new girlfriend is there, particularly when daddy's new girlfriend is around the child, Because you hear a lot of five-letter words that happen on a regular basis. I don't want this be around my child. And you have those situations which are really the feelings of the adults coming to play time and time and time again, that's really preempting the ability for these which should be level-headed adults who cared enough about each other to bring a child into the world, but now can't figure out how to co-parent enough to raise this child in the fear and admonition of God and to make this child have the ability to live out their God-given potential. So you see a lot of that happen. And so oftentimes, if you have individuals who, as they become maybe just a little bit more mature, or once they deal with the idea that, you know what, we're just not going to be together. But for the purposes of this child, we got to figure out a way to make this entire piece work. And so you mentioned how your person had gotten remarried. Oftentimes, once that's off the table and when the other person is off the table, and hopefully they can get the support of their new spouses to realize that now the four of us got to figure out a way to try to raise this child. And if we can get folks to be realistic and be a little bit more mature about that and get beyond those issues that cause the relationship to dissolve from the very beginning, I think we can move a long way about trying to solve this problem.
Because in part of our research we learned in Maryland, there's an effort to bring both parents together when there's court-ordered child support and have the state bring both parents together to negotiate ways that instead of, like you said, Representative Wooten, where the mother's not working and the father's repaying the welfare support for the mother, where both parents are brought together and there's a situation that's negotiated where the mother will work and the father will work, and the amount that is paid to the state is negotiated. And it's an amount that both parents can afford to do. So there's ways that we can have with support from the community to bring parents together, but there are also examples too where there's state-ordered child support, where the states are looking at how to bring custodial parents together to work out support orders. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Alicia Johnson. I work for First Line Schools, so naturally we work with 3,000 kids or more between the ages of kindergarten and high school. And so, of course, I'm still, I feel a little torn because I'm thinking of children, and I don't hear that piece, although I know this, the bottom line is that the children need to have the opportunities to be served. However, we can figure out getting the parents together, and it's very uncomfortable. This is a really uncomfortable situation. So I guess my question is, are you familiar with any preventative programs or programs to start having these conversations with children, age-appropriate conversations with children to avoid this cycle continuing? I know that y'all doing a lot of work right now in the trenches, but do you know of any, I don't know, there's just so many conversations that need to be had, anything from sex education to conflict resolution, how men and women interact. These age-appropriate conversations that could to start to maybe cancel out some of the cycle that's been going on. I'm just curious because I work with kids, and that's where I'm interested.
The one group that kind of jumps out there, they're a mentoring group, and because they do mentoring, they kind of provide a holistic curriculum to address many of the issues that you're thinking about. I'm thinking about the Silverback Society. Lloyd Dennis and many young men who I know on a regular basis are a part of that, and that's a part of the curriculum. And most mentoring programs, actually, regardless of what race they tend to focus on, tends to talk about fatherhood, child rearing skills, things along those lines. So you might see it incorporated in that curriculum. I don't know if you know of any other programs that they may have.
I know of one program. It's a nonprofit. It's called the Metamorphosis Project. It's in Renew Accelerated High School, and they do workforce development. They talk about anger management and conflict resolution and things of that nature. Also, with NOLA dads, I started at the age of 16, and you don't have to be a father to be in the program. You just have to be a young male. So you will get parenting and fathering and relationship skills at a young age before you even attempt to, I don't deny anyone. So you can be 50, I have 50-year-old guys. The age group is supposed to be 16 to 24, but I don't deny anyone. So you can, get a lot of these different skills of communication and conflict resolution, different background, how to discover yourself just through the program.
Good evening. Adrena Freeman, senior at Dillard University, a political science major. Welcome to Dillard. I don't have a question, but I guess a statement. How did we get into this mess? Because I understand when a crime is committed, a person is arrested and goes to jail. So how is it that a civil matter between two adults for child support lands an individual in jail?
Predominantly, and I'll answer because I practice in Mississippi, but many states are like this. It is a civil matter, but oftentimes Department of Human Services is involved. And so therein you have a contract now that the father may not know actually exists, but there's a contract now between you, the mother, because she is the parent of the child, and the state if she's receiving benefits from the state. So usually what you have is the state coming after the father to reimburse them for whatever they have expended towards the mother, whether it be insurance or SNAP or TANF. They're looking for that reimbursement. And so typically that's how you wound up with a father who may be facing jail time. Also consider that generally, I know in my practice, you don't typically ask that a father be jailed on the first contempt matter or the second. But now we have to keep back in the court because each time she has to pay for someone to go back in the court, okay? If DHS is taking 3 to 4 years or 5 or 6 years and she simply can't wait any longer and she comes and she pays me, now we go back in the court, and if she has to keep coming back in the court, you are a habitual contemptor. And the court may then say, I'm not going to keep allowing you to come before my court with the same problem. You have the ability to pay, bailiff, take him to jail. I didn't say you go back home and you take care of what you need to take care of and you report to jail. I said, bailiff, put him in handcuffs and take him to jail. And so typically, I haven't had a client that has been taken to jail, but I have been called when they have been jailed. And then I go over and I file a petition with the court to get them out of jail. And so that's been my experience with how we get into that situation, on top of the fact what I talked about before about life circumstances.
You're gonna find it. You sound like you're going to law school. So when you get to law school, you're gonna find this out real quick. One, you may have a situation whereby, along with what Representative Wooten said, let's say, for instance, during one of those times you're visiting or you're spending time before an actual judge, and the judge, let's say, gives you an order or issues an order, and that order may say that you have to show up on such and such a day at such and such a time, or you have to pay X amount of dollars by a certain particular time. When you don't do that, you then violate the court's order. By violating the court's order, then you usually can be arrested, and oftentimes a warrant may be put out for your arrest. In the exact same way, if you had a traffic ticket and you didn't show up one particular day, and they put a warrant out for your arrest, and you happen to be driving somewhere and you get stopped for something else, and they put up your name, they see that warrant out for your arrest, and they'll leave your car on the side of the road and take you to jail. I've had that case happen many different times with many of my students for tickets they didn't even know that they actually had. So it's usually either that way or the way that Representative Wooten spoke about that'll land somebody in jail.
Thank you. My name is Nick Harris here at Dillard University. I'm somewhat torn between this triangle between the father, the child, and the mother. And I can understand all parts of it in this. But it's very tragic, to have the center person and the main person, the child, involved in where that would affect his environment and his living conditions. And we all talk about social determinants that affects the child's health and everything else. But I just want to know, after this is over, this conversation tonight is over, where do we go from here? And I'm community-minded, and I like the inclusion of the entire community in anything that we do. So my question to you, Carmen, where do we go from here?
Perfect question. Thank you so much. So in terms of what our next steps are, in terms of the Greater New Orleans Foundation, following this event, we've already begun conversations, but our plan is to formally partner with the Center for Family Policy and Practice to develop a report about court-ordered child support in Louisiana. As we have been trying to explore this issue, and as Patrick mentioned, there are so few resources available and very little education about what court-ordered support means in Louisiana. For instance, some of the people that we've spoken to have experienced, depending on how many orders a man might have in Louisiana, his income can be garnished up to 100%. So that is not really an incentive to work. As we've shared this issue with our board, we have board members who are employers, and one of our board members reported that he is following the state's mandate in garnishing child support payments for up to 60% of his employees. So we want to go deeper in this issue, and we're going to work with the Center for Family Policy and Practice, which did work in Mississippi, did a series of listening sessions, and developed a report that is helping to educate lawmakers who might not be as aware as Representative Wooten. We want to do that here too in Louisiana because there are so many issues. For instance, when you have child support orders and you're incarcerated, here in Louisiana, those orders still continue to accrue while you're incarcerated. And we've had people who have left jail and be rearrested upon release and then put back in prison. So we know that those are not solutions, so we want to go deeper so that we understand these facts, and we can use this report. We're also going to partner to develop legal analysis and recommendations, as I said, to educate lawmakers and also to help inform the community about what are some of the strategies that we can use to support fathers, to support families, to navigate this system, to advocate for their own rights, to understand what their rights are. And we hope to map the money trail of court-ordered child support collections and reimbursement. We understand that not all the money that's collected actually goes to the mother or the child. So where is the money going that's collected? And lastly, we want to connect national experts like the Center for Family Policy and Practice to local partners like you. So we thank you for being here at the start of our journey and for at least getting us a sense of why this issue is so important. It's an issue of family, it's an issue of workforce, and it's an issue of sustaining our community. So thank you for being here. We ask you to join us for a reception and have a safe evening. If we can give our speakers another round of applause.
I want to thank the Greater New Orleans Foundation for having me in this work. When Flint came to me, honestly, my father hadn't paid child support to my mom. And I was a little conflicted myself about should I take on this project, but I learned so much. And so thank you all for having me. Thank you for putting arts in this conversation. So where do we go? I don't know. If you don't have it, you can't pay it. And that doesn't automatically make you a deadbeat dad. No price tag can ever prove intention. Even some rich kids have father resentment. Some men pay and still stay away. Emotionally absentee. Everybody's got a definition of what a father should be. But money ain't the only useful thing. Need fathers who commit time, mind, body. What good is a signed check if your father or mother checks out of your life? Court served children till they're 18, but not for a lifetime. It takes a village, a new vision, to co-parent without resentment in these trying times of few jobs, little time, and more stress. Our children survive when families thrive. One system doesn't fit all. And for real, before the kids come, we need to have a conversation about bedroom expectations, because feel good can make a family real fast. Are we forcing relationships that we know won't last? Gotta teach our children how to love better than us, to break the cycle of anger and mistrust towards dads. We know some children never had a man or mentor in their lives, and we can't heal it all. But we can start small with honesty about our flaws, about our fights, about our fathers. And we have to do that for our children's sake, because they live or die by the system that we create.